Thank you for coming to the Dissertation Club. This is a space where we welcome recent graduates to discuss their dissertations. Every week, a graduate will present their dissertation. The session is being recorded, as I said, and Darina has kindly accepted the offer to deliver this third session. Her brilliant dissertation is entitled Workplace Barriers Female Marketeers Face in the UK. As always, before we begin, I just want to say that you should follow departmental guidelines and the advice of your supervisor. They take precedence over what we will discuss today. Please ask questions at any time in the chat box or raise your hand, then I will alert Darina to your questions. And also, if the text is too small on the screen, you can use the zoom icon in the top left of the screen to zoom in.
Sure, thank you for having me, and hi everyone. So this is my master's dissertation. I studied business innovation with entrepreneurship, and it was last year, so quite new. Also did the whole thing through the pandemic. So the title of the dissertation, as was previously said, Workplace Barriers for Female Marketers in the UK specifically. So I would start with the title just to pay special attention how specific it is. So it's focusing on a geographical position, one single kind of marketing industry, and then a female sector. So that's already kind of being a bit more specific when it comes to what I'm gonna say. It's not very broad. Here's my abstract. I think you'll be able to download or view the dissertation, have a read through in more details. So the abstract just kind of sums up the point of the dissertation in a nutshell, like 300 words. And then in the end, I included some of the keywords which can be used to kind of find my dissertation should I ever wish to publish it online. And next we move on to the overview page of the dissertation, which is also quite important. It's quite easy to kind of understand, and then you can see the ratios of each of each section of the dissertation, and you see that one of the biggest ones is the literature review. For me, for my dissertation, it was the bulkiest side of the dissertation. Then you have your methodology, then you have your findings and discussions, then you have your conclusion, bibliography, and appendices. And of course, it's going to differ from one to another. And I think there's a hand raised. Is there somebody raising their hand?
I can't see anybody raising their hands. No.
All right, my bad. Okay,
No.
let's keep going. So that's the introduction. That's where I kind of say what inspired me to do the dissertation, and the topic I chose was something that I was personally interested in. I would say that's a big part of like emotionally connecting with your dissertation, actually caring about what you're writing. So obviously I'm now working in the media side of things as a woman. So that made a lot of sense to me to go that route. And then connecting it with what I was studying at the time. And that's what I was basically writing, what inspired me, what kind of preliminary findings I could find, just an easy way to introduce the topic. I used a few quotes that I could find that were really helpful. And in the end, the kind of last paragraph, I basically wrote exactly what I'm going to say in the dissertation. So what I'm going to write in each chapter, just one sentence for each chapter, and then I ended it with the 3 questions that are going to be in my dissertation that I'm going to be answering. Then I would say for me, the most difficult, also the most important part of the dissertation was the literature review, what I could find. And that was divided into 3 sections. So the first one was the historical overview of women in marketing. That was kind of the broader term. So where does that come from? So how the role of a woman in a society has changed. And it went all the way back to the Second World War, when women were left in their homes, were left to pick up men's jobs, when they went to war and how it progressed from then on. And then kind of slowly approaching the more modern times, 90s, early 2000s, how women were working at the time. And then that kind of went into the next question. So if women are now working, what is preventing them from achieving the same result as men do? And that led into the second part of the literature review, which is barriers women face in the workplace. And that is also quite a broad term because we're not talking about anything specific. It is about a large group of different industries. So it can range from marketing to banking to science, anything. Just how the experiences of women across different industries have similarities, what patterns there are, and those patterns will later be used for my research. So they will be used as a guideline based on what I can find in this particular part of the literature review. And then the last stage of the literature review is the most precise one, is barriers women face in marketing roles. And that's as narrow as it's going to get. So what literature exists at this point that might be able to answer my question, and where is the gap that needs to be filled with my piece. And so basically I found there are pieces about women in marketing in Saudi Arabia, in other parts of the world, but there are none in the UK. Or there, for example, women in management positions in marketing, but not in marketing overall. So these were not answering my question precisely. So that's where is the gap that I was filling in, where I was able to identify why my dissertation would matter and why people would want to read it. Then moving on to methodology. And that part is also really important because that's basically going to set the tone for all the other parts moving forward. So I'd say methodology is quite similar to what you would do for your essays, what we all had to do for your essays, just your regular stuff or other classes. And then methodology is something that you would learn probably as well. And then that's going to help you then set up your mindset to what kind of questions you're going to ask, whether you're going to do qualitative or quantitative study based on the questions you've already answered with your literature review, also inspired by the methodology that was used in other literature reviews. So it was a lot of things comparing. So as you can see, even this part has a lot of references, and these references are not just research books, books on qualitative and quantitative research. These are also previous studies. So saying that this study about women in marketing in Saudi Arabia used this kind of methodology and received the results that I would want to receive. So we should pay special attention to that kind of methodology in the future. Then I describe how I would be collecting my data. So my chosen methodology was interviews, semi-structured interviews. And then by method of elimination, I was saying, why did I not use structured interviews or unstructured interviews? So I would say, structured interviews are too harsh. They would not allow enough discussion to take place to hear the full experience of women, what they had to go through in the workplace. Unstructured interviews would lead astray the topic of discussion and might direct it in another way where I wouldn't be able to use it for my dissertation. So I went with semi-structured interviews. Then we have data collection processes, data analysis. I would say for this part of the dissertation, even if it seems obvious, like you don't want to say, you should probably say, for example, I did a special part about conducting semi-structured interviews during the pandemic. So the safety precautions that I had to take, for example, if those were conducted face to face, make sure there's enough space between people, make sure that you might be doing it outside in the park where there's no confined space, so you have enough air to breathe. If you're doing it online, make sure you're not pressuring people to like turn on the interviews. So a question, did you consider interviewing men as well as women? So for the topic of my dissertation, I felt that it would not work to interview men because my topic was specifically about the experiences of women. I'm sure that if you want to talk about the experiences of men, that would be another dissertation. Otherwise, you're kind of speaking about two different topics, and one dissertation would not be enough. As I'm focusing on the way that there's a difference between different genders of being treated at work, specifically female, that's what I decided to focus on. So interviewing men would not be helpful, would not contribute enough to this, if that makes sense. Sure. All right. Then, of course, ethical considerations is probably something that you will talk a lot about with your supervisor. It's really important because it ensures the quality of your work, so that it's not questioned. So um, you ensure your conduct is very professional. You ensure that you're able to be unbiased when it comes to this. So this part is really important. So make sure to submit your ethical forms as well. Then reliability and validity, the two terms you'll probably hear as well. Also very important to distinguish between the two and how your dissertation will fall into each one of these. So introduce your understanding of reliability and validity and what you're doing to ensure your dissertation follows those as well. And that is the end of my methodology. So going forward to the findings and discussion, that is also a very heavy part. It included quite a lot of quotes, which I would say I've hidden them in tables because word count in tables doesn't count, but I was able to showcase as much information as I possibly could, where I could include almost all the quotes I've had throughout the entire time. So here I'm again reintroducing my three questions, just reminding the reader that these are the things that I'm going to be focusing on. These are the things that I'm going to try to answer, and going one by one. So very methodically, very methodically going one by one and answering these questions. So including smaller quotes here. How did I transcribe the interviews? So I would say the easiest way to do it is probably find a software, whichever works for you. Also, if you have a laptop, you probably have a feature where you can record your own voice and it's going to transcribe stuff for you. I know that on my MacBook, it's the FN button at the lower left. So you can just use that and just when you record your conversation, obviously following all the ethical rules, like asking if you can be recorded. So telling that I'm going to record now. So doing all of that, once you've done all of that, you're then able to export it and then use your computer or some kind of software to transcribe it, basically. I would say that's the best bet. But if you're going to if you're going to try and do it by hand, it's going to take you ages. Okay, I'm going to move forward. So yeah, always use a lot of references in your dissertation. I'm going to say that being organized is probably like your best bet when writing the dissertation. You're just going to avoid a lot of headache because remember, you're going to be writing it alongside all the other stuff that you might have, all the exams, all the other essays. So being very organized. And when it comes to references, I would suggest making a special file just for references from the very beginning and organizing it as early on as you possibly can, just so you avoid those issues in the end, because it's going to be a pain to then fill in. Then here's one of the examples, a table, how I include my quotes for each participant. So I had 10 participants, 10 women in different roles. They had different experiences. They were of different age. They were of different ethical backgrounds. So I tried to have as much of a diverse pool as I possibly can with only 10 participants, and explaining why it's so limited because I had limited time. So I couldn't go 100, 200 participants. So it's 10 participants, but it's good quality, diverse pool of participants. So I can cover as much as possible. And then they're all UK based because my study is focusing on the UK specifically. That was a big part as well. Working in different companies, so they don't know each other, these women, so they were not able to communicate with each other or anything. And then going question by question, adding quotes for each participant, explaining what kind of patterns I was able to find, what kind of maybe some interesting facts that were out of the ordinary. So maybe some people didn't experience what others have. Noting all of those things is really helpful. Just being objective. And one of like a really good thing that a Birkbeck professor has told me, sense check things. Just use your kind of common sense to double check stuff as well. Again, this is another kind of a table that I also included. So as you can see, that's where you can see more results in one place, just to make it easy when I sum up all of my findings, all of the discussions, where I go question by question, and I say 6 out of 10 women felt that they were not given equal opportunities at work, and then what kind of barrier that it would correlate with that will be discussed before in the literature review. So it's all very much tied in. And then we go to how is women performance affected by the lack of gender representation in marketing. Again, women answering those questions. I can also show you in the end what questions I use. They will be in the appendices part. You can see some of them here as well. So participants answering to question 15, their quotes, what they were saying. Then here's the conclusion. What were the outcomes? What findings I could find from the previous chapter, from connecting it back to the literature review. So it's all making one big circle just so that can be tied in. And then one of the last chapters I decided to include is research limitations and recommendations for future research. I find these ones very helpful. They're not mandatory per se, but I think if you can show that your work has potential to go forward, that you acknowledge that potential, that can be really nice as well. And then, of course, the bibliography, alphabetical order, and yeah, try to be very organized with these because you will regret not being organized in the end. And then here's the appendices part. You can have a look at the questions that I use. So it was a 2-part questionnaire. Here's where I collect kind of demographic data in the first part. So that's where I find out how old they are, what kind of level they would describe themselves as, how would they describe their ethical background, how long have they been working. So that's where I can show how diverse my participants are. Then part B is where I actually gather all the information. How did I find the interviews in the first place? To be honest, it's just the most obvious way that you can possibly think about. I just went Googling all the different marketing firms and then just reaching out and thinking, like, would you be interested? I'm writing this dissertation. I think it would be really helpful to chat about women. And I would say maybe 70% of people who I've asked agreed, which is quite a lot. So sometimes they won't answer, but just keep trying and reach out. Maybe you'll make new connections, network, also really good if you then want to find a job. But yeah, just reaching out to people, finding different firms. So just go Googling, say, marketing firms in the UK or female-led marketing firms in the UK, and then use their contact information, LinkedIn, etc. Pretty much it. Now, here is the interview responses all in one table, one big color-coded table. And I did this more for myself than I did this for the reader because it just helped me to organize my thoughts as well as my dissertation. So you can see this is where I can show all the responses from every single participant in one place, and refer to that table quite a lot in my dissertation. And that's pretty much it. That's all I can say for now. I mean, if you guys have any questions, I can answer anything.
Thank you,
Just go ahead.
Darina. Thank you, Darina. I think that was brilliant. I have a few questions, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
Actually, Digby, you go first. I'll follow you. Go ahead, Digby.
Hi. Thanks so much. That was really interesting. I was just wondering, this may sound like quite a broad question, but what was the most challenging part of it? Did you find it sounded like the literature review was quite extensive, but it'd be good to hear what you found most challenging about it.
Yeah, sure. So I think for literature review, I think one of the most difficult parts is finding the relevant literature. So just filtering stuff out. Sometimes you might think like, yeah, it could be really, really helpful to, for example, in the context of my dissertation, to mention social media, because a lot of female campaigning might happen on social media, or a lot of women claim to be social media marketers when they're kind of influencers. That could sound relevant, but it actually isn't. It would lead my dissertation astray in the grand scheme of things. So kind of filtering the stuff that you're including to make sure that it is really, really relevant to what you're doing is quite hard. And just try not to underestimate it. Just don't include everything that sounds vaguely familiar. If that makes sense, if that's a good answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that really helps. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, Darina. So, thinking about your literature review, I think that's a brilliant idea. How you started, you took the historical look and looked very generically. Then, as the literature review progressed, you narrowed your focus. Like, what was the thinking behind that? I think that's a really great template to use. Like, what was the thinking behind that approach?
Yeah. So I'm gonna start by saying that my dissertation proposal was not good. So the thing that you're submitting before your dissertation, where the marks don't generally count, was not good. So for me, it was a lot of working with my supervisor from the very beginning. So try to get as much information, as much advice from my professor as possible from the very beginning, and then she kind of suggested the way that's best to look at it. So it could have gone a few different places. So it could have gone, you know, historical overview. Then you could say women in marketing, like already, and then you say women in marketing in the UK, and then by the end of it, you don't have enough literature. So just imagining a funnel where you introduce a broad scheme of things, and then you kind of chip away at it to narrow it down to fit your theme.
Yeah.
Is probably a good approach. So if you're interested in cars, you can start saying cars, electric cars, what brand of cars, where they're driving, what rules, just kind of trying to find the direction that you're most interested in by narrowing it down as much as possible. And it's going to be really helpful for you as well. If I stopped at barriers women face in the marketplace, period, that would have been so much information to cover, because I would have had to cover not only the UK, I would have had to cover other industries, such as, fashion, banking, teaching, science, etc.
Yeah, you got a
According to
question
which
from.
criteria? According to which criteria did you structure the dissertation? It was pretty much what you guys will be given. So based on the handbook, you're gonna have all the kind of mandatory topics that you should include. And then if you have anything else to say, like you should speak to your supervisor and they will suggest maybe doing an additional topic. Sometimes I know people do 4 or 5 chapters for a literature review. That's also can be done. I just did 3. Um, Sometimes people include more in their methodology or in their findings and discussion. So it really depends.
Okay, and a question about the methodology, which I thought was brilliant. Like you referenced, I mean, you evidence the methodology with similar studies rather than just relying on generic research books. You referenced it with similar studies. Like, what was the thinking behind that? I think that was really innovative. How you grounded your methodology in the literature that you was reading.
Yeah, so it really comes down to a question like, what made you think that that kind of methodology would be appropriate for your type of study? So um, I was able to answer that question only when I said, well, these guys did it. And I think that's the kind of question that I want to answer as well. Basically, I want to cover experiences of women which are not quantifiable per se, so you can't really translate those into numbers. So it should have been qualitative. And then saying, this study did it, here's what they found, their findings were really helpful, so I will base my study on this. And also
Okay,
going from the other direction where I say, these guys used this methodology, which did not cover everything that they said that they would cover.
brilliant. A question from Kathy. Hi, Kathy. Um, what was on your page 2?
Hi,
Hi, Kathy. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you all?
I'm good. Good,
Good.
thank you, Kathy.
This
So
page, page 3, would have been considered the table of contents?
yeah, that's the table of contents. So here I have like my starting page, the abstract. So
Abstract,
that's
okay.
the part
Oh,
text stuff. Then you
okay.
have your abstract, your
Yes.
keywords, and then that's my table of contents.
Okay, so page 2 was just the keywords. It was like index?
No, page 2 wasn't just the keywords. The keywords were included in the abstract. They were just at the very end. So you can see here's the ending of my abstract.
Okay.
And then at the
Okay,
end, I
so
just
page
included
1
the
and 2
keywords.
were the abstract. Then page 1 and 2 were the
Yeah.
abstract. Then
Yes,
okay, the
okay,
table of
page 1, 2,
contents.
abstract. Okay, yeah.
Great, thank you. And also, your findings. Were your findings what you expected them to be, or were they slightly different?
Yes and no. I didn't expect to hear some of the stuff that I've heard from women working in marketing, because I haven't worked in marketing myself up until that point. I was studying, so that was a revelation. Um, but generally, I'd say that because in the end I said my dissertation was somewhat successful because it answered the questions that I wanted to answer, I'd say yeah, because I
Okay,
did presume that there are issues that women are facing in marketing roles.
yeah,
And so because I found there were, I would say it was somewhat expected. Yeah.
okay. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry for joining in late. Thank you for taking part in the dissertation. It's actually quite helpful for me because I'm actually in the process of doing mine.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, in regards to the interviewing process, how difficult did you find to do your transcriptions and to actually get your interviews written down and your answers from your participants. Did you actually manage to get valid data from all of them, or did you end up maybe using some data from some of the participants and maybe some from others?
I would say that ethically, I don't think you're allowed to be selective about your data. So even if it doesn't answer your question, you should state that in your dissertation. But your dissertation supervisor would probably be able to tell you more about this.
Yeah.
What I've been told is that even if your data doesn't answer your question, it's still data that you should be using because it is useful,
Yeah.
because it proves the contrary. When it
Correct. Yeah.
comes to conducting the interviews, being organized is key. So do not leave things until the very last second. So be
Yeah.
prepared. I know I've lost a couple of recordings when I was doing my dissertations. I accidentally deleted it from my phone, and it's just a nightmare you don't want to know. And so to avoid any ethical issues, I could not re-interview the same people. I had to go to other people just
Yeah.
because, the questions should be unexpected, like they're hearing them for the first time. And because my interviews were semi-structured, I already had a baseline for them to go from. So they could expand on their experiences, but I would kind of try to keep them in the same lane so they would not go too far left field, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. Thank you. And one last question. With your interviews, if you had one of your participants that didn't want to be recorded, would you give them a chance to hand them the questions in paper so they can answer them? Would that be
They don't want to be
acceptable?
recorded. I mean, technically, it wasn't my methodology. My methodology were interviews. It would kind of lean more towards a questionnaire, I would say.
Yeah.
So I asked them in advance. I let them know. So when I reached out to them, I said, I'm writing the dissertation and I'm conducting interviews where, I might want to record you. Would you be okay with this? So I've done that before I actually went out to interview them.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And
Thank you.
also, Alex, I'd like to
Yeah.
add as well. So if
Yes.
there's something wrong, if there's something wrong with the data then that you expected, please mention that within the dissertation. I think that's a great chance to be critical
Yeah.
as well. That gives you that opportunity. And also, if your methodology had to change as well, have that discussion within the methodology. Like, why did it change? Why did you
Oh, you
adopt
mean
something else
okay? So you
as
mean
well?
if you were planning to do interviews and then you ended up doing questionnaires,
Did you
right?
end up have that discussion and really evidence why this was the better path? Like, you have to use a bit of spin maybe, but explain why, and that would be an opportunity for you to be
Yeah.
critical in that respect. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Worries.
Yeah, I had a separate chapter for research limitations. So
Brilliant.
what have hindered my dissertation, just so I can ensure that, if somebody's reading this and checking this, and then they're going to be like, oh, but you could have done this. And then I say, I know I could have done this, but that's why I didn't,
Yeah.
so it just kind
Yeah,
of
you're
helps.
You got your
justifying
protection.
it. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, of course. That's great. That's great. And I suppose connected to that question, if there's something like looking back at your dissertation, if you had a chance to write it again, what would you do differently? Would you do anything differently, Darina?
To be honest, no, I'm quite happy with what I've written. I feel like with my how much you should appreciate your supervisor and how close you should get with them. And just don't be afraid to ask them questions, maybe bug them. I know they might say you get like 2 or 3 meetings with them, but just push your luck a little bit, you're doing it for you at the end of the day. Just reach out.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
may I ask you
helpful. So
something? So
yeah.
with the interviews, is there a minimum target? Because everybody says yes, there is a minimum of, I don't know, 10, 14 people. But I've read dissertations where there's only 2 to 3 people being interviewed.
Yeah. I would
How
say
many did
that
you
if
interview,
you
for
think
example?
about it, for me it was 10. It was 10 people with 15 questions. But
Yeah.
if I would be asking them, let's say 30 questions, and they're going to give me super long answers, and I would want to be very specific So, for example, not just women in the UK, but women of a certain age or of a certain ethnical group.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna go in more depth, maybe 2 or 3 would have been enough, you know, with like really in-depth answers. But it's just really making sure that you have enough time and enough space, because if you're gonna interview 20 people and they're gonna give you like 1 sentence, 2 sentence answers, you really can't really use that information if it's just a yes or no.
Focusing on quality rather than quantity. You're right. Yeah.
I suppose,
Yeah.
Alex, is about what you can justify as well. Like if you can justify those three, so maybe those three people are thought leaders. I hate that word,
Yeah.
but maybe those three people are very influential in the field. So
Yeah.
they're amazing. Or there's some reason why those three people will be sufficient. As long as you can justify like a nice fat paragraph justifying why that is so, it should be fine. But have that discussion with your supervisor just to make
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Congratulations as
No
well.
problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Darina. I have no questions unless anybody else has any questions
I think there were a
before we
couple in
wrap
the
up.
chat. So I think Kathy asked what data analysis method did I use. So that was qualitative, semi-structured interviews.
Yes. Well, what analysis method did you use to analyze your data? Did you use content or thematic? It seems.
No, I didn't. I didn't use semantics. It was qualitative data analysis. So it wasn't really because you know semantics is reading into the meanings of things. That was basically just finding patterns from what people have shared with me, their experiences, and putting it all together. So also when it comes to interpreting the data, it's important to not add your own opinion to it. Just say what they said. Do not try to kind of overthink it, really.
Yeah, I'm using semi-structured interviews as well, and I have 10 participants. I've already started my interviews
That's great.
with some of them, and I had proposed to use thematic analysis because it's a perception and attitude study. It's exploration of perception. So I basically be assessing people's experiences. Yeah, I'm a little um, not so sure about how exactly to code, what I'm getting. What is there a specific process that is used to do that, or am I just looking for recurrent answers in terms of how someone perceives something?
I would you can do that as well, but if there's a similar study, that you're engaging with and see how they use thematic analysis, and you could leapfrog over there and references it as well. So if there's a particular study that you've seen and you like that mode of analysis, you can bring that into your dissertation and just reference where you was inspired by this type of analysis as well. There's also like generic research books out there which show you the different approaches. But I always say it's better to be grounded with the literature. Like if there's a particular study that's very similar to yours, and see how they employed thematic analysis and leapfrog off of that. I think that would be the best. That would be the best option.
Okay.
I hope that was clear.
Yeah.
If I can
Everything is
just
just
add to
confusing.
Ryan's stuff, just
Go ahead, Doreen.
remember to get into the mindset of a reader. So if they have any questions at any point when they're reading it, like where did you get that information from? Because that's most likely how they're going to be assessing your stuff. If they're going to answer, like if they're going to ask that in their heads, you should reference it. Just throw in a good reference in there to just say that's where it came from, so you can check it. I've read it, it's really good. Here's the reference. And then, oh, like, it was highlighted by this and that in that book. Maybe throw in a good quote, just that is very particular. Just don't throw in just any quote in there, just something that answers the question. That's really good as well.
Did you have a target number of interviews that you wanted to do, and did you reach that number? Good question. From
Yeah, I
Melissa.
planned about 20 at first in my proposal. Then after
20.
speaking with my supervisor, Yeah,
That's a lot.
my
That's a lot.
proposal was not good, so it was a learning curve. A lot of talking with my supervisor. So I've spoken to her, and she suggested, 20 is a bit much. Try to find 10, and finding 10 was tough.
Yeah.
So just honestly sense check stuff, because I reached like 20 people. Now thinking about it, this crazy. I would not have any time at all to do literally anything. And then of course you guys are gonna have your essays, your exams, all happening at the same time. So the earlier you're able to start, the more organized that you can be, the the better that it's going to be in the end. Just think about your mental health, so you can, be calm, prepared, relaxed. I think I submitted my dissertation a couple of days earlier than I was supposed to, and I was just done with it. So I don't have to think about it at all. So yeah, I had a number of people I wanted to interview, 20 people, and I had their names, I had their email addresses, I had everything. And then in the end, it just came down to 10. So it came down to choosing the most diverse pool of participants. So based on their age, based on their years of experience in marketing positions, based on their ethnicity, based on their roles, so whether entry level, mid level, or high level.
That's great. And we got an excellent recommendation from Helen. She recommended a book, The Coding Manual for Qualitative Researchers, the third edition. Definitely, I'll check that out. Let me copy that. Thank you, Helen. And if there's nothing else, then we'll end the session. Thank you, Darina, again. Really appreciate that. Round of applause or thumbs up for Darina. It'd be great. Thanks. Very interesting. Hi, Glyn.
Thank you guys, and good luck with your dissertation writing.
That's great. Thank you, Darina, once again. I really appreciate this. Okay.
No problem.
Take care, everyone. Everyone have a nice evening. Afternoon.
Bye bye.